Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to #GotMoney. I'm Elizabeth Jackson. We've had a couple of technical issues this morning, just trying to get our show ready for you. And I, for my first show back on Got Money, I really wanted to start the show on a positive note. And we have a regular guest for Got Money. He's an expert in the property space, which I just love, as you know. And you look, I think the thing is about Australia and Australians, if you live in Australia, you love property. We all do. The thing about property is there's factual information and then there's opinion. And I don't like opinion, and neither does our guest. It's Mr. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting. Hey, Terry, welcome to Got Money.
Hello, Elizabeth. How are you doing? May 2021 be very different to 2020?
May it. Starting off nicely, actually. Terry, you're a regular guest on Got Money. I'd really like you to unpack a little bit about why we have you on the show. What is it that makes you unique? What does your business do?
I started Hotspotting 15 years ago to essentially help investors, property investors, determine the best places to buy. We do a daily research exercise. We're looking for clues. We look right across the country, every town and suburb get scrutinised at some point in what we do. And we're looking for markers that give us clues to which areas are going to be the outperformers. That's essentially what we're looking for, the areas that are going to outperform the norm, because those are the places that people want to buy, where they're going to get superior growth.
How do you do that? How do you decide what is a great area and what isn't?
Well, what I fundamentally believe is that real estate markets arise out of local economies. It's all about what's happening in your local economy. We find that in major media, economists banging on about record low interest rates as if it's the sole determinant of everything in real estate, which is, if we had a detailed discussion, I'd show why that's a ludicrous proposition. It's really about what's happening in the local economy, whether it's growing, whether its population is growing, whether it's creating jobs. One of the big markers we look for is infrastructure spending. We like areas that have good existing infrastructure and have new infrastructure spending coming up, because those are the ones that are going to have dynamic economies with jobs being created and demand being created for real estate.
So you create these reports and you make them available online.
That's right. We have a website called hotspotting.com.au, and anyone can go there and buy our reports. We have national reports. We identify top 5 or top 10 in different categories. We have reports for all the major cities and some of the major regional markets as well. We do other things. People who have a need for a report in a particular area can ask us to do it. We create custom-built reports. We do that kind of thing. Provide various information services to both real estate consumers and also to real estate businesses.
Yeah, it's vital. It's a part of my business. And before I do anything with any of my investors, I go to your website first. Have you noticed any changes to various different markets as a result of COVID?
Well, yeah. I mean, 2020 was a fantastic advertisement for residential real estate as an asset class, because despite everything that COVID brought to our door, residential property in the vast majority of locations around Australia showed not only growth, but really good growth in many cases. And it kind of exacerbated trends that are already underway. The biggest trend in the 21st century impacting real estate, I believe, is what I call the exodus to affordable lifestyle. A lot of media has portrayed this as being something created by COVID. In actual fact, it's actually been underway for longer than that. Sydney's been losing population to internal migration for 10 years, Melbourne for the last 3. So COVID came along in 2020 and kind of turbocharged that trend by making more people aware of the possibilities of working from home, because they were forced to in the lockdown periods. So it's about technology and also the desire of people to have lifestyle at an affordable price. I guess a lot of people were in the big, expensive, congested cities because they felt they needed to be for their work primarily. And those who have discovered, well, we don't actually have to be in the big cities, have made a choice increasingly to move to areas that offer something different. So that's probably been the big thing that's happened as a result of COVID. And the many consequences of that. And one of them is very, very low vacancies in most parts of Australia, not including inner city Melbourne and inner city Brisbane, but elsewhere, vacancies are not only low, but ultra low at the moment. And that's a big factor in determining what's going to happen in real estate markets in 2021.
So when you say vacancies, you're talking about the rental market, just to clarify
Yeah.
for our consumers.
The rental market is, the rental market's a big influencer on what happens with the market for buying and selling property. What we've often found is that areas where vacancies are low and rents are rising, prices will tend to follow that trend. And we're seeing that happen in many markets across Australia at the moment. And the current situation is that vacancy rates of 1% or lower are actually the norm in Australia now. And again, people living in the central parts of our biggest cities might find that startling news because it's quite different in those inner city areas of Melbourne and Sydney in particular. But elsewhere, and particularly in regional Australia, it's 1% and lower. And that's a rental shortage crisis, which the politicians don't even appear to be aware of because they're so busy dealing with COVID. But one of the things it does mean is that it's a great time to be a landlord, ironically, because investors have been sort of sitting on the sidelines for 2020, and I'm expecting them to become a lot more active in 2021 because, as I say, great time to be a landlord. You can get really good rentals for a rental property, and prices are rising and are going to continue to rise this year. So it's time for investors to get off the fence, I think.
Yeah, it would have been great if I remember Kate Bakos and I having a show at the beginning of last year and us saying to them, look, it's a great time to buy. And they really didn't. Do you prescribe to the thoughts that always do the opposite to what the market's doing? Because right now there's a massive land shortage for title blocks here in Melbourne due to the builder's bonus. Is it a good time for an investor to get into that race? Because we're seeing prices of land go through the roof. And each stage that is released, we're seeing up to $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 additional costs inside of the land. Is it a good place to buy from when it's that revved up?
Look, it's not ideal for people to be getting into the market when it's that frenetic. The ideal time might have been a year ago, or in some markets 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's only the most enlightened real estate consumers who actually, see opportunities and detach from the herd and do things that are opposite to what everyone else is doing, and therefore buy at the best times. Whereas most people are reactive. They're herd animals. They'll follow the pack into a boom market once they hear about it. Unfortunately, for people wanting to get into the market now, it is rather frenetic and very competitive in many markets across Australia. You have to have all your ducks in line. You have to have your finance sorted out. You've got to be ready to move quickly because properties are selling very quickly, and we're seeing more and more stories of buyers buying sight unseen. So they're not going through the processes in many cases of doing personal inspections. They're using the online tools, the virtual tours, and buying very quickly without having seen properties, which is kind of a new ball game. And it's a lot of people out there as real estate consumers are struggling to adapt to that.
Is that a good way to buy?
Look, I think you can buy without actually having seen the property, and you can do it safely, but you need to do it in a certain way. I think the ideal way is to employ a representative, a buyer's agent, or somebody similar to that to do the looking and searching for you, and to organise, the building and pest inspections, etc., and check out the zoning and what the council will allow and all those kind of things, and of course go through the proper conveyancing processes with a qualified person. So you can buy a property safely without actually having inspected it personally yourself. And I do that because I just don't have time to be zipping around the country. I always engage a good buyer's agent that I trust, and get it done that way. And so I own property that I've never seen, but it's performing very well because I went through the right processes.
So we always talk about regional Victoria doing well and regional areas around Australia doing well. Is there any recovery or immediate recovery for the apartment market? Because that still seems to be in the doldrums.
Apartment markets in the inner city areas, yes. Vacancies are still quite high. It's the part of the market that has been most detrimentally affected by the COVID situation, because it's put the kibosh on what used to be a very busy Airbnb market, which a lot of apartment owners, investors were using. So that market's still struggling. Vacancy is still quite high, and rents have fallen. It's actually the exception, though. I think the exception to the rule. The rule is that markets around Australia have very low vacancies and rents are rising. In fact, are rising a lot. I've just been doing some figures this morning, in fact, for a presentation I'm doing at a seminar later in the week, and there's been some very big rental growth. It just isn't happening in those inner city areas. Unfortunately, mainstream media tends to primarily come out of Sydney and Melbourne, and they're writing stories about what's happening on their doorstep and kind of implying that's Australia, when in actual fact it's the exception to Australia at the moment.
Yeah, I interviewed Nikki Hutley before Christmas, and she said, while we lost our international students, we've seen in excess of 300,000 Australians return home as a result of COVID. And, they're coming from big cities in Europe and in America, and they are kind of used to apartment living. So I wondered if that would elevate that market a little bit out of that negative space. And obviously it hasn't really impacted on it at all.
Well, it's having an impact, but just not on those markets. I think what we are seeing and hearing is that those expats buying, many of them are buying sight unseen, but they're buying in lifestyle areas. That's the big trend that's driving markets at the moment. So they're buying in the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast, Byron Bay, those sea change and also hill change areas are getting. That's where a lot of the demand from that type of buyer, but all types of buyer really as well. Those are the markets that have been really pumped up by the current trends. So it's showing up in the stats showing that regional Australia has outperformed the capital cities in 2020 on price growth and rental growth. It's actually been happening for longer than that, but it became very stark in 2020, where if you look at every capital city in Australia, their regional area of that state actually had higher price growth than did the capital city in every case.
Is there still room for growth in regional Victoria and regional Australia, considering how well it's done in the last 12 months? Is it too late to get into those markets?
Not too late. Again, the ideal time, depending on the market, would have been a year ago or 2 years ago. But real estate cycles tend to be much longer than 1 year. And I think this particular trend has legs because it's not a COVID thing, it's a technology thing. And COVID's just given it greater impetus. And so more and more people have made that decision or had that awareness. And so I think it's going to continue because, if you can sell a home in somewhere in the middle Melbourne, for example, and buy a place in Ballarat or Bendigo and get a place of the same standard, but at a fraction of the price and have money left over and have a lifestyle where you're not commuting for an hour or more every day, or, just getting out of that big, congested, expensive city lifestyle and being able to effectively work remotely, then, it's very attractive to people. And I think it's just
no-brainer.
It's going to roll on, I think.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good to know. Wonthaggi. Somebody said to me the other day, Phillip Island, Wonthaggi. And I went, Phillip Island. What about Wonthaggi?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those places that pop up that's doing really well as a result of this trend. And some really unlikely places are sort of popping up as outperformers in, say, the last 12 months. Another one that popped up on our radar screen in 2020 was Venus Bay in sort of South Gippsland. So just a little town that, lovely place, lovely environment, but you wouldn't normally put it on a list of hotspots. And I probably still wouldn't, because with our selections for our hotspots reports, we tend to take a long-term view. And so we would ask the question, okay, this is a location that's getting demand from people out of Melbourne and elsewhere because of this trend. But long-term, what's going to drive growth? You know, what's in the local economy that's going to sustain this kind of growth long-term? And really, it's a place that's really about tourism and retirement, I guess, like many other places. And that's a little bit fragile. So we're more interested in those places that have, you know, a stronger and more diverse economy. So we're more interested in a Ballarat or a Bendigo, or perhaps a Traralgon or Albury-Wodonga at the border, which is a very strong market at the moment. Warrnambool perhaps heading out west. You know, larger cities or country towns, more diverse in their economies. Identifiable growth drivers of future growth, like infrastructure spending that's underway or upcoming.
What about Sunshine Coast up there? Is that still the place to be? Obviously lifestyle, but are we still able to go in there and capitalise in that market, or has that reached its peak?
I don't think it's peaked yet. Certainly, I mean, the ideal time would have been 2 to 3 years ago for the Sunshine Coast. It's been gathering speed on the back primarily of big infrastructure spending. There's that factor again, but, you know, over $20 billion worth. You know, the airport's now international, a new medical precinct, multi-billion-dollar medical precinct that's bringing all these new people into the Sunshine Coast to live and work. New CBD being built from the ground up, and a whole lot more. So it's going to continue to be a growth market long term. But again, you know, the best time would have been 2 to 3 years ago. So what we're trying to do now, as we always are, is looking for those locations that will do something similar, but haven't yet, you know, fulfilled their growth potential. That they're just at the beginning of their cycle. One such place that we're very interested in is Toowoomba in Queensland as an alternative to some of those places like the Sunshine Coast that are already had quite a bit of growth.
Yeah, I remember reading a report on yours from Toowoomba maybe 5 years ago. And even back then, you were interested in it as a marketplace.
Yeah.
The food bowl, connectivity from mines to shipping, all of that. They had was it there an airport that they just established in Toowoomba as well, for the freight?
So since that, you know, reading that report 5 years ago, Toowoomba had a bit of a spurt and then it leveled out. It's on the cusp of another big growth spurt, but probably bigger one. The new privately developed airport, the Wellcome Airport, is a game changer. They now have direct flights from some of the big cities of Australia that they didn't have before. And coming into the mix to take it to another level again is the Inland Rail Link, which is now well under construction. It's heading north through inland New South Wales towards Queensland, and the pivotal point in Queensland is Toowoomba. And because of that, there's going to be a sort of an intermodal transport facility built in Toowoomba, and there's a lot of businesses that want to be close to that. So we've got multi-billion-dollar investments targeted on that. So that's another reason why we think Toowoomba is a place to consider. Hasn't yet become really, really busy like some of the other markets around Australia. So a good time to be considering it. Is
there enough employment in Toowoomba and educational hubs? I mean, I look at Victoria and you say Ballarat, and I know there are some of the best private schools in Australia in Ballarat. So, you know, that makes it attractive.
Toowoomba is the second largest inland city in Australia. It's a very substantial regional city, and it's got a very diverse economy. So it's got a lot going for it already, and it's going to become more so. So it does have education, it does have medical facilities, it's got a lot of manufacturing, it's got a lot of tourism. It's renowned for its gardens, and it has the Carnival of Flowers every year, which is one of the biggest festivals anywhere in Australia every year. And it's also the capital city for a vast resources province, which is really starting to crank up again. There's a lot of coal seam gas, for example, and coal. Not very attractive elements, but nevertheless, it's part of the local dynamic, part of the local economy, and it adds to the importance of Toowoomba. And then with this inland rail link plus the airport, suddenly it becomes this possibility for businesses. Businesses are always looking for places where they can set up their business, where they've got sort of a need for big warehousing, etc. And it takes up a lot of land. And in the big cities, it's very expensive. But if you can find a regional city where it's a lot cheaper and they've got an airport that has direct flights to Sydney and Melbourne, for example, and a rail line that connects Brisbane to Melbourne, suddenly it becomes a player.
Yeah. Oh, massive player, massive.
Yeah.
A little bit of fiction now. I don't know if you can help me with this. Commercial and retail sector, what do you think it's going to be like for them this year? Do you see the cliff? Is there a cliff for these two marketplaces?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. I mean, there is, media loves to talk about cliffs, don't they? We were supposed to have one in September and we didn't.
Yeah,
most of the cliffs they forecast never happen. It's just a headline. Obviously, CBD, the big commercial sector is got some problems to deal with because the trends we've been talking about that are pumping up regional markets and smaller capital cities and the fringe areas of capital cities. One of the consequences of that is fewer people in the CBDs, lesser requirement for office space. And we're seeing, I saw an article this morning, in fact, charting the decline in CBD office rents in Sydney and Melbourne recently. That's a consequence. But for investors, ordinary investors, mum and dad investors, commercial and retail means something completely different. It might mean a suburban shopping strip. And I don't see any particularly detrimental impacts for them. I think there's something that more and more investors will be considering: small offices, small industrial warehouse office type buildings, and suburban retail. And if you know what you're doing,
if you know what you're doing,
well, that's true of any type of property investment. There's a guy I know who's on our panel of partners who actually teaches people how to do that well, and he's very good at it. And the big thing about that type of property is that you get these incredible rental returns. It's about cash flow, that type of property. Perhaps you don't get the capital growth you do from residential, but you can get great rental returns, which means you've got serious positive cash flow, which is still, pretty difficult to achieve with residential. You kind of hope that you can break even, and what you're looking for is capital growth. Whereas with commercial, it's a little bit the opposite.
You're optimistic about the market ahead?
I think 2021 is going to be a national property boom. I'm talking residential again. I've got no doubt about that. And I noticed that pretty much all the forecasters and analysts are predicting a year of pretty good growth. The only difference, this time last year, or perhaps March, April last year, a lot of the economists were forecasting a big drop in property values. But there was a lot of disagreement.
Mate. They were crying last year. We were telling people to buy and they were crying. Yeah.
Yeah, they got it totally wrong. And because then,
you're being really polite about this, by the way. I'm just saying you got it totally wrong.
They're not real estate specialists, and they don't really get it. And so they constantly call it wrong. And the specialist real estate analysts like myself and yourself and Simon Presley and Louis Christopher were saying different things. They know it's not going to happen like that. So right now we have this really unusual thing where pretty much everybody, you, me, the specialist, credible real estate analysts, plus all the bank economists and others who like to have a say, they're all pretty much saying the same thing, that 2021 is going to be a year of growth. It's just a question of how much. I think it's going to be substantial. And I think you can, it's not wishful thinking, it's not super optimism. I think in many parts of Australia, that property boom is already underway. And, we've got these incredibly low vacancies. We've got good momentum in markets. We've got first home buyers really active.
Charging. Yeah, they're charging ahead.
They're being the most active cohort. And investors now starting to come into the market, so last year we had growth almost everywhere. and substantial growth in many cases without investors being a big part of it. So in 2021, when investors become more active, it's going to just pump it up even further. And the big element, I think, which will make a national property boom this year and beyond even more certain, is the infrastructure spend, the infrastructure-led economic recovery that state and federal governments are planning.
It's beautiful how they've spent. This is the thing I love about Australia. You know, God, do you get anything better than that? But let me ask you this. When you set up the home builders scheme, and you release that kind of money to the first time home buyer market, and you elevate that marketplace with the kind of vigor that we're currently seeing, and also last year, isn't that a placebo market? Is there a concern around coming off the end of 2021 into a dip because we've got all this stimulus, or does the government just continue to throw money at the first time home buyer market?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen already, we've had an instance already where it was like the government was providing certain stimulus and everyone said there's going to be a cliff, a September cliff, because everything is just going to be switched off in September by the banks with their mortgage holidays and by the federal government with its stimulus. And of course that didn't happen because they would be incredibly foolish to do it. They didn't. So now we're talking about a March cliff because, you know, that's another deadline when the government will make a decision. I think a lot of the stimulus that's out there for first home buyers in particular, it's not just COVID related. You know, some of it's specific to COVID, but you know, many of the schemes that are helping first home buyers, for example, predated COVID, and there's no reason why they're just going to be suddenly switched off because it's working for everybody. You know, it's working for government, it's working for business, it's working for the consumers who benefit. So it's something that I think that in some form is going to continue. And it's not, they're not going to flick a switch and just turn it all off all of a sudden, and we're going to have a crisis, because it just doesn't ever happen that way. And logically, it won't happen this time that way.
That's great. I love that. I love good positive news about my market. Mr. Terry Ryder, thank you for joining us. So how do we find you? Firstly, are you still doing your weekly bulletin? I haven't read one recently, although I've been on holiday.
I do. Tends to be on a Tuesday night where I do a live broadcast out through social media. It didn't happen last week for things that were happening in my life personally, which I won't bore you with. But yeah, it's usually Tuesday night. But I'm flexible with it because sometimes things get in the way. But I like to do a weekly broadcast to bring people up to date with what's happening with prices. I'm going to do one this week which is going to focus on rents, because there's recent data on rents that show that's been some, you know, just backing up what I'm saying about how low vacancies are in most places. There's some really quite startling rental growth figures to talk about. Yeah,
we settled one property in Geelong. I think we settled it on the Thursday and it was rented by the Friday. Terry, thank you for joining us. Look, if you're considering as an investor investing into anywhere in the Australian market, please don't wing it. Go to Hotspotting and buy one of Terry's reports, or buy a couple of them. And also look out for Terry's Facebook page. It's Hotspotting, isn't it, Terry? That's how they find it.
It's just called Hotspotting.
Hotspotting, right. Find it. I follow Terry. He's a wealth of information. That's why I have him on the show. Thank you for joining me, Terry. Amazing having you on. I want to thank everybody for their support over Christmas and ensuring that our shows went out. I want you to know that we're here for you over the next 12 months. Any questions for any of our guests, please reach out to us, and have a great week. And we look forward to hanging out with you all again next week. Thanks, Terry.